Picture this. It's 1943. The heart of Europe is engulfed in flames. Nazi Germany controls nearly the entire continent. The Allied forces are desperate for intelligence, any scrap of information that could turn the tide of World War II. And in the middle of this inferno sits a small, neutral country, Switzerland, untouched by bombs, unmoved by threats. Or so it seemed. But beneath the pristine facade of Swiss neutrality, something extraordinary was happening, something that would change the course of the war. Hidden in plain sight, distributed on street corners, sold in cafes, were newspapers. Ordinary newspapers. Or were they? What if I told you that these seemingly innocent publications were actually elaborate espionage networks? That Swiss journalists were secretly coded spies? That every headline, every editorial, every advertisement could contain intelligence destined for Allied commanders thousands of miles away? That Switzerland, the nation famous for banking secrecy and neutrality, was leaking some of the most valuable secrets of World War II. Welcome to Cipher Tales. Today, we decode one of the most ingenious propaganda and espionage operations of World War II, Switzerland's secret newspapers. The hidden channels that allowed intelligence to flow from the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe to the desks of Allied strategists. This is the untold story of how ink and paper became weapons, how neutrality became a cover, and how Switzerland's press waged a silent war that Hitler never saw coming. The geography of secrecy. To understand how Switzerland became the nerve center of World War II espionage, we must first understand its unique position. Imagine Europe in 1939. Germany unleashes its blitzkrieg. Poland falls in weeks. France collapses in months. By 1941, Nazi Germany and its Axis allies controlled territory from the Atlantic to the gates of Moscow. Britain stands isolated across the English Channel. And there, impossibly, at the very center of Hitler's empire, sits Switzerland. Surrounded on all sides by Axis powers and occupied territories, Switzerland was a geographic anomaly. To the north, Nazi Germany. To the west, Vichy France, a puppet state collaborating with Hitler. To the south, Fascist Italy under Mussolini. To the east, Austria, already absorbed into the Third Reich since 1938. Switzerland was an island of neutrality in an ocean of war. But this wasn't accidental neutrality. Switzerland had maintained its independence through centuries of European conflicts, protected by its mountainous terrain and a policy of armed neutrality. Every Swiss male was trained for military service. The Alps became a fortress. Hitler himself reportedly said that attacking Switzerland would be like swallowing a porcupine. The cost would be too high, and Switzerland served the Nazis better as a neutral hub. Because here's what made Switzerland invaluable. It became the only place where all sides could still communicate. Diplomats from Allied nations maintained embassies in Bern, the Swiss capital. German officials conducted business there too. Intelligence officers from Britain, America, the Soviet Union, Germany, Italy, and Japan all operated in the same cities: Zurich, Geneva, Basel, Bern. It was a spider web where every thread led to Switzerland. And threading through this web were the newspapers. The Swiss press, a unique ecosystem. Switzerland's press in the 1940s was unlike any other in Europe. While Nazi Germany had obliterated press freedom, consolidating all media under Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry, and while occupied nations saw their newspapers become mouthpieces for fascist ideology, Switzerland maintained a fiercely independent press tradition. The Swiss constitution guaranteed press freedom. But more importantly, Switzerland was multilingual: German, French, Italian, and Romansh. This meant newspapers could publish in multiple languages, reaching audiences across enemy lines. A German-language Swiss newspaper could be read in Berlin.
A French edition could reach Vichy, France, or be smuggled into occupied Paris. Italian papers could circulate in Mussolini's Italy. Major Swiss newspapers of the era included the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, a prestigious German-language daily with a reputation for meticulous reporting. The Journal de Genève served French-speaking readers. The Basler Nachrichten covered Basel and had extensive international connections. Smaller regional papers dotted the country. Each had its own editorial stance, but all shared one thing: they were uncensored by foreign powers. This created an unprecedented opportunity, because while these newspapers appeared to simply report news, they were actually doing something far more subversive. They were leaking intelligence. Not through secret codes hidden in crossword puzzles, though that happened too, but through something even more ingenious: journalism itself. Let me explain how this worked. The mechanics of newspaper espionage. The genius of Switzerland's newspaper espionage lay in its simplicity. Intelligence didn't need to be encoded in elaborate ciphers that could be intercepted and decrypted. Instead, it was published openly, disguised as legitimate news reporting. This method exploited a fundamental principle. In wartime, information is power, and controlling what information flows where is a form of warfare. Here's the mechanism. Allied intelligence officers and diplomats stationed in Switzerland would cultivate relationships with Swiss journalists. These weren't always formal spy-handler relationships. Often they were friendships. A British embassy official might have drinks with a Neue Zürcher Zeitung editor. An American OSS officer, the Office of Strategic Services, America's wartime intelligence agency, might slip a tip to a Geneva journalist over dinner. The journalist would then publish stories that seemed innocuous but contained carefully placed information. An article about German industrial production might mention a factory location and output figures, intelligence gathered from refugees, defectors, or resistance networks. An article about a Nazi official might detail his movements and security arrangements. An economic analysis might reveal supply shortages in occupied territories. These newspapers circulated legally throughout Europe. German officials in Zurich would buy the Neue Zürcher Zeitung and send copies back to Berlin. Italian diplomats would purchase Swiss papers, and crucially, Allied intelligence services would receive these same newspapers through various channels. Diplomatic pouches, smuggling networks were simply subscriptions. But the brilliance went deeper. Because Switzerland was neutral, its journalists could interview people from all sides. A Swiss reporter could interview a German general, extract information through clever questioning, and publish details that would never appear in Nazi-controlled press. The Germans, wanting to maintain good relations with neutral Switzerland, and perhaps believing the journalist was naive, would sometimes reveal more than they intended. This created a triangular information flow. Intelligence gathered from Axis sources, published in Swiss newspapers, and consumed by Allied analysts. The newspaper was the laundering mechanism, transforming espionage into journalism. The players, journalists as spies. Now let's talk about the people who made this possible, the journalists who walked the tightrope between neutrality and espionage. Because these weren't just writers, they were intelligence operatives disguised as reporters. One key figure was Hans Hausemann, though he operated more as an intelligence coordinator than a traditional journalist. Hausemann ran the Bureau H, an unofficial intelligence network that gathered information on German military movements and passed it to Swiss military intelligence and, covertly, to the Allies. He utilized journalists as sources and conduits. Then there were editors at major papers who understood the game. The Neue Zürcher Zeitung's wartime editors maintained contacts with Allen Dulles, the legendary American spy master who ran OSS operations from Bern starting in 1942. Dulles, who would later become CIA director, used Swiss newspapers as both sources and channels. He would leak information to Swiss journalists, who would publish it, knowing it would be read by the right people. Swiss journalists also acted as cutouts, intermediaries in espionage chains. A resistance fighter in occupied France might pass information to a contact who smuggled it into Switzerland. That information would reach a Swiss journalist who'd publish a sanitized version. Allied intelligence, reading the article and knowing the code phrases or context, could extract the real intelligence.
Some journalists were unwitting participants. A reporter simply doing their job, investigating rumors of German troop movements, interviewing refugees, might unknowingly serve intelligence purposes when their articles were analyzed by Allied experts. Others were fully aware. They'd receive specific questions from intelligence contacts, find out about Factory X, confirm if General Y is in location Z. The resulting articles would answer these questions through seemingly ordinary reporting. The risk was enormous. Nazi intelligence, particularly the Gestapo and Abwehr, German military intelligence, watched Swiss newspapers obsessively. They knew what was happening. German censors tried to pressure Switzerland to restrict its press. In 1940, Germany threatened economic sanctions unless Switzerland muzzled newspapers critical of the Reich. Switzerland partially complied, introducing limited press controls to avoid invasion, but clever journalists found workarounds. They'd use euphemisms. Sources report unusual rail activity instead of German troops are moving. They'd bury intelligence in lengthy economic articles that German censors might skip. They publish corrections or clarifications days later. The correction contained the real intelligence, while the original article was a decoy. This was journalism as espionage, and it worked because it exploited the Nazis' own propaganda machinery. Hitler's regime was obsessed with controlling information, but they also craved validation from neutral press. A positive article in a Swiss newspaper could be reprinted in German media as proof of international support. So the Nazis couldn't completely shut down Swiss journalism without losing that propaganda value. The Dulles Connection, America's Swiss network. No discussion of Switzerland's World War II newspaper espionage would be complete without examining Allen Dulles, the man who transformed Bern into an Allied intelligence hub. His story illuminates how deeply intertwined Swiss press and espionage truly were. Allen Dulles arrived in Switzerland in November 1942, ostensibly as a special assistant to the American minister in Bern. In reality, he was the OSS station chief for all of Central Europe. His apartment at Herrengasse 23 became the epicenter of Allied intelligence operations. And his primary tools weren't just spy networks or encrypted cables. They were relationships with Swiss journalists. Dulles understood something fundamental. Information was Switzerland's real export during World War II. Not chocolate or watches, but intelligence. And newspapers were the marketplace where this information was traded. He cultivated an extensive network of contacts. Journalists, editors, publishers, all became sources or assets. Some knowingly worked with him. Others simply found him a fascinating dinner companion who asked insightful questions. Dulles was a master of the craft. He'd read every major Swiss newspaper daily, analyzing articles for intelligence. When he spotted something valuable, he'd contact the journalist to learn more, often discovering the source of the information. The Neue Zürcher Zeitung was particularly important. This newspaper had correspondents throughout Europe and maintains its independence despite German pressure. Dulles read it religiously. Articles about German industry, military appointments, or occupied territories often contained clues. A mention of a new factory manager might indicate production priorities. A profile of a Wehrmacht officer could reveal unit locations. But Dulles also used Swiss newspapers for active operations.
He'd leak misinformation designed to confuse German intelligence. A planted article about Allied plans, false plans, might reach Berlin through Swiss papers, leading the Germans to misallocate resources. This was propaganda in reverse, using neutral press to feed disinformation to the enemy. One documented example involved German defectors. When high-level Germans approached Dulles offering to defect or provide intelligence, arrangements had to be made secretly. Swiss newspapers occasionally published cryptic notices or articles that served as signals. An obituary for a person who didn't exist might signal a meeting time. A seemingly random article about Swiss hiking trails could indicate a dead drop location. The Swiss authorities officially maintained neutrality, but many Swiss intelligence officers quietly cooperated with Dulles. They'd share information gleaned from intercepted communications or border surveillance. And sometimes, this information would surface in Swiss newspapers, leaked by Swiss intelligence through journalistic contacts, knowing Dulles would read it. The intelligence pipeline, from source to publication. Let's trace the journey of a single piece of intelligence to understand how the system functioned in practice. Imagine it's early 1944. The Allies are planning the D-Day invasion, and they desperately need information about German defenses in France. Our story begins in occupied France. A resistance member, let's call him Jacques, works at a railway depot. He notices increased German military train traffic heading toward the Normandy coast. He counts the trains, notes the types of equipment being transported: artillery pieces, ammunition, infantry units. This is valuable intelligence. But how does Jacques get this information to the Allies? He can't simply radio London. The Germans monitor airwaves, and getting caught means torture and execution. Instead, Jacques uses a network. He passes the information to a courier who smuggles it across the border into Switzerland. This alone is incredibly dangerous, involving forged papers, bribed officials, and mountain crossings. The information reaches a contact in Geneva, perhaps a Swiss sympathizer, perhaps someone working directly with Allied intelligence. This contact then approaches a Swiss journalist, not with the direct request to publish secret intelligence, but with the tip. There's an interesting story about increased German railway activity. Refugees coming from France are talking about it. The journalist, let's say he works for the Journal de Genève, investigates. He interviews recent refugees, asks carefully worded questions, and confirms the information. He writes an article titled something like, "Eyewitness accounts describe increased military presence in northern France." The article discusses refugee testimonies about German troop movements, equipment transports, and fortification efforts. The article is published. On the surface, it's simply reporting refugee accounts, perfectly legitimate journalism. But the article contains specific details, towns mentioned by name, descriptions of equipment types, and estimated numbers of trains. An intelligence analyst reading this article in London can extract actionable intelligence. Here's where it gets even cleverer. The Germans also read this article, but they see it as a neutral Swiss newspaper reporting refugee rumors, propaganda value perhaps, but nothing compromising. They might even appreciate that the article mentions German military strength, which could deter Allied plans. Meanwhile, the article makes its way to London through multiple channels. The British Embassy in Bern sends copies via diplomatic pouch. Swiss newspapers were also airmailed to Britain and America when possible. Allied intelligence officers in Switzerland telegraph summaries of key articles. In London, intelligence analysts compile information from this article with dozens of other sources: reconnaissance photos, intercepted communications, other spy reports. Jacques' observation about railway traffic becomes one piece of a massive puzzle that helps the Allies understand German defenses before D-Day. And Jacques? He may never know his intelligence reached the Allies. The system was compartmentalized for security, but his information, laundered through Swiss journalism, helped save lives on the beaches of Normandy. This was the pipeline, repeated thousands of times throughout World War II. Switzerland's newspapers weren't just reporting history, they were shaping it.
The propaganda war, manipulating perception. But Switzerland's secret newspapers served another purpose beyond pure intelligence gathering. They were weapons in the propaganda war, a psychological battlefield where perception mattered as much as military strength. Nazi Germany understood propaganda's power. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, had weaponized media. German newspapers, radio broadcasts, and films all served the Reich's narrative. German invincibility, Allied weakness, Jewish conspiracy theories, the glory of Nazism. Occupied nations were forced to consume this propaganda, their own newspapers either shut down or converted into fascist mouthpieces. But Goebbels couldn't control Swiss newspapers, and that drove him mad. Swiss publications offered an alternative narrative. They reported Nazi atrocities, the persecution of Jews, the brutality of occupation, the concentration camps. While the full extent of the Holocaust wasn't known until the war's end, Swiss newspapers were among the first to report disturbing accounts from refugees. Articles about labor camps and deportations hinted at horrors the Nazi press denied. This served multiple propaganda functions. First, it kept the truth alive. People in occupied territories sometimes received smuggled Swiss newspapers, learning that the Nazi propaganda surrounding them was lies. A Dutch resistance member might read a Swiss article confirming that Germany was losing on the Eastern Front, contradicting German claims of victory. Second, Swiss newspapers bolstered Allied morale. British and American readers could access Swiss press through various channels, seeing neutral confirmation that they were on the right side of history. When the Neue Zürcher Zeitung published an editorial condemning Nazi barbarism, it carried weight precisely because Switzerland was neutral. This wasn't Allied propaganda, it was independent journalism. Third, Swiss newspapers sowed doubt within Germany itself. Copies of Swiss papers circulated in Germany, read by intellectuals, military officers, and officials who could access them. These readers encountered information unavailable in German press, reports of military setbacks, economic problems, international condemnation. This underground readership was small but influential, including members of the German resistance who would attempt to assassinate Hitler in 1944. The Nazis fought back. They pressured Switzerland economically, threatening to cut off coal and food supplies unless Swiss press moderated criticism. They infiltrated German agents into Switzerland to monitor journalists and intimidate sources. They published counter-propaganda in German newspapers, attacking Swiss press as Allied lackeys or Jewish-controlled liars. But they couldn't silence the Swiss press entirely, because doing so would undermine Switzerland's neutrality, potentially pushing the country toward the Allies. Hitler needed Switzerland neutral, as a banking center for Nazi gold, a diplomatic meeting ground, and a buffer zone. Destroying Swiss press freedom risked losing those advantages. So, an uneasy equilibrium emerged. Swiss newspapers practiced self-censorship to avoid provoking invasion, but they published enough truth to maintain credibility. They danced on a knife's edge. Every edition, a calculated risk. Specific operations. Case studies. Let's examine specific instances where Swiss newspapers directly impacted World War II intelligence and propaganda operations. These case studies revealed the tangible effects of this espionage ecosystem. Case Study 1. The Rote Kapelle Connection. The Rote Kapelle, or Red Orchestra, was a Soviet intelligence network operating across occupied Europe.
Its members included German communists, anti-fascist intellectuals, and even Wehrmacht officers who turned against Hitler. Swiss newspapers played a role in this network's operations. Members of the Rote Kapelle used Swiss newspapers as dead drops for coded messages. An article published on a specific date with certain keywords could signal meeting times or confirm operations. More directly, when the Gestapo began arresting Rote Kapelle members in 1942, some intelligence about the crackdown reached Swiss journalists through Swiss intelligence sources. Articles about German internal security operations hinted at what was happening, alerting other networks to the danger. Swiss newspapers also published information that Rote Kapelle had gathered. Intelligence about German weapons production or military morale would reach Swiss contacts who'd pass it to journalists. Published articles would be read by Soviet intelligence officers in Switzerland who'd relay the information to Moscow. Case Study 2. The Fries-Kolbe documents. One of the most valuable Allied assets was Fries-Kolbe, a middle-level German Foreign Office official who became disillusioned with Nazism. Starting in 1943, Kolbe photographed classified documents and smuggled them to Allen Dulles in Bern during diplomatic trips to Switzerland. These documents contained extraordinary intelligence: German diplomatic cables, military assessments, reports from occupied territories. Dulles called the intelligence Kappa, and it became some of the Allies' most reliable information. But here's where Swiss newspapers enter. Some of Kolbe's intelligence was too sensitive to transmit directly to Washington. Interception risk was too high. Instead, Dulles would selectively leak sanitized versions to trusted Swiss journalists. An article about "Sources indicate German concerns about Soviet advances" might be based on Kolbe's documents without revealing the source. This served multiple purposes. It got intelligence into circulation for other Allied analysts to find, and it provided Kolbe with plausible deniability. If the Gestapo questioned how information leaked, they'd see it published in a Swiss newspaper, suggesting the leak came from Switzerland, not from Berlin. Case Study 3. The 1944 July Plot. In July 1944, German military officers attempted to assassinate Hitler and overthrow the Nazi regime. The plot failed, and Hitler survived. In the aftermath, the Gestapo arrested thousands, torturing and executing anyone connected to the conspiracy. Swiss newspapers played a crucial role in reporting the plot and the aftermath. While German media portrayed the conspirators as traitors, Swiss press offered a different narrative. Articles described the plotters as patriots trying to save Germany from Hitler's madness. They reported the brutal reprisals, show trials, mass executions that German media censored. This reporting served intelligence purposes. Allied commanders wanted to know the extent of internal German opposition. Swiss newspapers, based on refugee accounts and intelligence leaks, provided assessments. They also provided propaganda value, evidence that not all Germans supported Hitler, which could be used in psychological warfare campaigns. Moreover, some conspirators had contacted Allen Dulles before the plot, seeking assurances of Allied support. These contacts generated intelligence that sometimes surfaced in Swiss newspapers as vague references to German opposition movements.
The costs, risks, and sacrifices. This system of newspaper espionage, for all its successes, came at a terrible cost. People died for this. Journalists risked everything. Sources paid ultimate prices. Swiss journalists operating in this shadow world faced constant threats. The Gestapo maintained a presence in Switzerland, monitoring journalists, identifying sources, and occasionally conducting assassinations. German agents would threaten journalists' families still living in Germany or occupied territories. Editors received death threats. Newspaper offices were vandalized. Some journalists were arrested when they crossed borders. A Swiss reporter on assignment in occupied France might be detained by German authorities on espionage charges. These journalists sometimes disappeared into concentration camps. Sources faced even greater danger.
The refugees, resistance members, and defectors who provided information to Swiss journalists were hunted. If the Gestapo identified someone as an intelligence source, the consequences were brutal. Torture to reveal networks, execution for treason, families punished collectively. There were betrayals, too. German intelligence ran double agents who infiltrated Swiss networks. These agents would pose as anti-Nazi sources, feeding false information to journalists. Articles based on this misinformation would mislead Allied intelligence. Occasionally, double agents would identify journalists working with the Allies, leading to arrests or assassinations. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine being a Swiss journalist knowing that an article you publish might save Allied lives or might get a source killed. Every word carried weight. Every published detail could help the Allies or compromise a network. The responsibility was crushing. Some journalists broke under the pressure. They self-censored excessively, rendering their reporting useless. Others became reckless, publishing too much, too specifically, leading to catastrophic security breaches. And there was moral complexity. Switzerland's neutrality meant its newspapers covered all sides. The same paper publishing intelligence useful to the Allies might also publish articles that served German interests, whether intentionally or not. This ambiguity haunted many journalists. Were they truly helping defeat fascism, or were they simply exploiting a war for news? The legacy. Impact on World War II and beyond. So did it matter? Did Switzerland's secret newspapers actually affect World War II's outcome? The answer is yes. While it's impossible to quantify exactly how much impact newspaper intelligence had, we know it contributed significantly to Allied successes. Intelligence gathered through Swiss networks, including newspaper channels, helped in several critical areas. It provided information on German military movements and production, aiding strategic planning. It revealed internal German political dynamics, helping the Allies understand Nazi decision-making. It exposed German espionage operations, leading to counterintelligence successes. It sustained resistance movements by providing communication channels. And it waged psychological warfare, undermining Nazi propaganda and bolstering Allied morale. Alan Dulles himself confirmed that Swiss sources, including journalists, provided intelligence that shortened the war. After World War II, declassified OSS documents revealed the extent of Swiss newspaper involvement in intelligence operations. The CIA, successor to the OSS, studied these operations as templates for future information warfare. During the Cold War, similar techniques were used. Radio Free Europe and Voice of America broadcast information into Soviet-controlled territories, not coded spy messages, but simply truthful reporting, which was itself subversive. The concept traced directly to Swiss World War II newspapers: information as weapon, journalism as intelligence. Today, in an era of information warfare, propaganda wars, and media manipulation, the Swiss newspaper model remains relevant. The same dynamics play out: authoritarian regimes trying to control narratives, independent journalism serving intelligence functions, and the blurred lines between reporting and espionage. So here's what you need to remember about Switzerland's secret newspapers in World War II. In the middle of history's most devastating conflict, surrounded by fascist powers, a small, neutral country waged a silent war. Not with armies or bombs, but with ink and paper. Swiss journalists became spies without leaving their desks. Newspapers became intelligence networks without codes or ciphers. And information became ammunition. Every morning, As Swiss citizens read their newspapers over coffee, they were unknowingly participants in a vast espionage operation. Every article about German military movements was potential intelligence for the Allies. Every editorial condemning Nazi atrocities was propaganda warfare. Every advertisement could contain a coded message. The mundane act of reading a newspaper was, in Switzerland during World War II, an act embedded in the global struggle between freedom and tyranny. The journalists who made this possible operated in shadows, their true contributions often unacknowledged. They couldn't publish bylines that said intelligence operative or allied asset. They simply wrote the truth, knowing that truth was the most powerful weapon against lies. They documented atrocities the Nazis tried to hide. They reported military realities that German propaganda denied. They provided windows into occupied Europe for the outside world. And they did this knowing the risks, knowing that the Gestapo watched, knowing that sources might die, knowing that a single mistake could lead to invasion, arrest, or assassination. They did it anyway, because journalism at its best is about truth. And in World War II, truth was resistance. Switzerland's neutrality is often criticized. The country did business with Nazis, housed Nazi gold, turned away Jewish refugees. These criticisms have merit, but the full picture includes this. Swiss newspapers, despite official neutrality, fought against fascism. They provided intelligence that saved lives. They preserved truth when much of Europe was drowning in propaganda. And the Swiss newspaper model of the Second World War reminds us that information is never neutral. Every fact published, every truth revealed, every lie exposed has consequences. Journalists can be warriors without weapons. Newspapers can be intelligence agencies without spy networks. And neutrality, when weaponized correctly, can be a form of resistance. This was Cipher Tales, decoding the hidden history of World War II propaganda and espionage. The story of Switzerland's secret newspapers is a story about the power of information, the courage of journalists, and the thin line between observing history and shaping it. These newspapers didn't just report on World War II, they helped win it. If you want to decode more hidden secrets from World War II, subscribe to Cipher Tales. Hit that like button if this story of journalistic espionage amazed you. And comment below, what other World War II secrets should we decode next? The Vatican's intelligence network? Stalin's propaganda machine? The role of cartoons in Allied espionage? The war may have ended in 1945, but its secrets are still being decoded, and we're just getting started.